are on the front lines of distracted driving prevention. Captain Shannon Trice is a graduate of Cornell University and the FBI National Academy and a 22-year veteran of the Syracuse Police Department. He also serves on the International Association of Chiefs of Police Highway Safety Committee and the New York State DWI Enforcement and Deterrence Committees. And the Syracuse Police Department, as we've been hearing throughout the day, are currently working with the TxDOT to test the effectiveness of high visibility enforcement on distracted driving. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you'll come up with so far. And our second speaker will be Officer Chris Andres. He's with the Novato, California Police Department. He's experienced the ramifications of distracted driving as an officer who enforces the law and also someone who lost a family member. His sister-in-law and 2-year-old niece were struck by a texting driver while walking in a crosswalk, and his small niece, Callie, did not survive. Chris is going to talk to us about their enforcement efforts and also the result of California's cell phone and texting laws. And so he's also speaking on behalf of the California Office of Traffic Safety. So I'm going to turn it over to Captain Trice.
Good afternoon. Basically, the theme and my colleagues from California is going to be, can law enforcement have some type of impact on distracted driving? And I want to start out, if I can get the PowerPoint to work, press it down. With Star Trek, a TV show from the 1960s. And this notion of the 6 degrees of separation, that everything is related to something else within 6 steps or less. The idea for the cell phone came from Star Trek. And if you don't believe me, Gene Roddenberry, who was the creator and writer of Star Trek, he actually sued the cell phone companies saying that he created the idea, and he won $11.8 billion from them. Gene Roddenberry, if you don't know, was a former police officer who worked for the Los Angeles Police Department. He worked for them for 7 years before he got into screenwriting. All of Star Trek, a lot of the Star Trek shows, all had some theme of community involvement or what can society do to improve itself. And if you know, the LAPD also has a very strong history of traffic enforcement. Star Trek takes place in the year 2266, which is about 250 years from now. If you remember, Captain Kirk was never on the bridge of Star Trek talking on his little telecommunicator. Lieutenant Uhura was there using her hands-free Bluetooth at the time. So we have a ways to go to develop. Can you do the next slide? I'm just going to rely on you. Okay. We have a ways to go to develop our culture to catch up to Star Trek. And we've seen this before, and I've heard the other speakers talk about it. We've done programs like this before. The DWI programs and the seatbelt programs. I know Texas has them. I'm going to talk about New York State's experience in it, but you've had the same experiences that we've had. When we started out doing DWI, it used to be we gave people rides home. It was socially acceptable to drink and drive, and then that changed with tougher laws and getting the police out there enforcing the laws. And then slowly, at least in New York State, we started out in the 80s with 1,500 deaths, and then we dropped down to now we're about 200 deaths due from drinking and driving. So a substantial increase, all from high visibility enforcement, from getting the cops out on the street and changing the culture one stop at a time. The same thing happened for the seatbelts. In the 80s, New York State passed a seatbelt law, the first in the nation, making it illegal for you to operate a car without wearing a seatbelt. We had a 46% compliance rate. They did some education, boosted it up a little, but they found they were missing something. And they copied the DWI model. And basically they started doing the roadblocks and the high visibility enforcement, combining education with enforcement to drive the seatbelt rate up, and currently it's at about 93%. It didn't happen overnight. It took about 20 years. It took a long time for the DWI too. Next slide. So NHTSA wanted to see, well, can this work? Can this high visibility enforcement model work for distracted driving? Can we do the same thing that we've done for seatbelts and for impaired driving? So they tested 2 cities, one being Syracuse, which is my city, and the other one being Hartford, Connecticut. And they had control cities, and they sent the social scientists out to check the rate of talking on the cell phone and texting in both cities and the control cities. Then they had a big education push with TV ads, radio ads, and they said the cops are coming. And meanwhile, we had to do our own preparation. In this program, they came up with a tagline, phone in one hand, ticket in the other. Next slide. And the issue really comes down to branding. And how does this high visibility enforcement work? And it's really founded, I believe, on a business model where if you tell one person they come into your business and they have a great experience, they're going to tell 3 other people. If they have a horrible experience, they're going to tell 20 other people. So we're in the business of trying to make dissatisfied customers, aren't we? And we do that by giving them tickets, handing out tickets. And they go home and they tell their loved ones and everybody else about the experience that they had and that, hey, the cops are out there enforcing this law. They're paying attention to it. And that's how this general deterrence starts to blossom, like a flower. And that carries over into our branding. And I'm sure you have communities here in Texas where you know full well that you should not speed through their jurisdiction. Am I right? We have those same communities in New York State. That's what we strive to do in Syracuse. I think that's what any police agency strives to do. We want our police agency to be known as the tough agency on a particular thing. We want people not to drive distracted in the city of Syracuse. In our city, in our community, that's what we want to be known, and that's what our brand wants to be. Next slide. So how do we get the cops? Because we all know that the cops are overburdened to begin with. We all know that they have lots of things to pay attention to. How do we get them to buy in and pay attention to this and get them motivated? There's a great book out by Daniel Pink called Drive, and he talks about the 3 levels of motivation. And motivation 1.0, he says, was back in our caveman days where we had to survive, and basically that was our only motivation, just to eat, reproduce, and move on. And then as society developed, our next motivation became the industrialization of the world. And now that motivation was the carrot and the stick. You do this for me, I'm going to give you this. And that's how the business world started. He says now motivation, our society has adapted so much and developed so much that those don't mean anything anymore. And that now the motivation is motivation 3.0, and there's basically 3 components to it. And the first is autonomy, the freedom for people to make their own decisions about how they do their work. And that's what we did in this. We let the cops figure out the best ways to go about enforcing this law. And then we took the cops that were the most successful and we copied their work habits and transferred them on to the other cops to educate them. Which is the same thing that was done with DWI, the same thing that was done with the seatbelts. That's why NHTSA's come up with the impaired driving cues and the SFST courses, all based on successful police officers detecting and apprehending people that were breaking the law. The second portion of that Motivation 3.0 is purpose. The cops have to have a purpose. And we spent time, you have to explain to them why they're going to do what they're going to do and what the importance of it is. And I think that's been pretty well covered so far today. And the last one is mastery. We all have a drive to become good at something, and we push on to get that goal. Next slide. And when we try to get that goal, I think you skipped the slide. You go back one? No, never mind. All right. I forgot the top part of that slide. We set goals for them to help with their mastery. And the goal that we set, and it was kind of fashioned after the researchers, we went out and sent out cops, and I sent out the supervisors. How many tickets can you get? How big is this problem within our city? And we found out that a police officer not busting his tail could get reasonably 4 tickets an hour just on distracted driving. That's how bad it is. That's how much of it is going on. So we set a goal. And the reason that we set a goal is because you have to keep score somehow. The rivalry between the Yankees and the Boston, I know you have rivalries out here. What if we had those games and no one kept score? There wouldn't be any passion. There wouldn't be any effort. Why bother? So we set that goal for our cops. These are the enforcement strategies that the best cops came up with and that were the most successful. The first is this roadside watching, which was just sitting curbside watching traffic. As you know, the next strategy, mobile patrol, distracted driving is a huge issue for law enforcement to begin with. Police officers have a crash rate that's 4 times that of the general public. I think it's due in large part to all the things that are going on and the things that we expect of our police officers. So mobile patrol, although it was done, it was very difficult and very taxing because basically we're staring at motorists and watching for their behaviors. Oops, go back. Okay, thanks. Checkpoint, we didn't find much success with that, but we were very blatant about our checkpoints. Hartford, Connecticut, they used checkpoints and used them to great advantage. They would dress people up as bums, etc. They would be the spotters, and the people coming in the checkpoint would get ticketed. We didn't have much success with that, but my brothers and sisters in Connecticut did. The use of the high ground was imperative. You got to be able to look inside these passenger vehicles. And the one way to do that, if you're in a regular patrol car, is being up higher than they are. Towards the end of this experiment, we were sitting in parking garages looking over traffic. Which brings me to enforcement vehicles. The motorcycle, the SUV, excellent enforcement vehicles to use for this type of enforcement because they allow you to get up on people and look inside and see what they're doing. Next slide. The cues that these cops used. Behavior never lies. It is quite obvious that something's going on if somebody is staring down at their lap and not paying attention. At the time of this study, New York State had a primary law for talking on a cell phone. You could only talk on a cell phone if you had hands-free. Texting was secondary, which I could never understand. It was the only secondary law that New York State has ever had. And they since repealed it, but at the time of this, that's what it was. And I never understood because we're trying to prevent people from, I saw one researcher had a video where they were hitting the cones. We're trying to prevent that. So why do we have to wait for them to hit the cones before we can pull them over? It seems idiotic. We use the impaired driving cues the most. The maintaining lane position, the speed and braking problems, the vigilance issues, the judgment problems, those are what the cops were looking for. And once they locked onto that, they would start staring at the driver and paying attention to what they were doing. And inevitably, they were on the cell phone, if not some other type of distraction. Next slide. What happened? Let me give you a little flavor of Syracuse. It's a mid-sized city. Everybody thinks New York State is New York City. It's not. We're a mid-sized city. That's our population, about 140,000. I want you to kind of remember that, and I want you to remember our metropolitan population, which is just over a million, or 500,000 people. Next slide. This is what we did in just 4 one-week waves. We issued a total of 16,000 tickets. Just about 10,000 of those were cell phone tickets. These other tickets that you see underneath, those are all paired or associated with a cell phone ticket. So the dangerous driving is the passing the stop signs, the unsafe lane change, that kind of stuff. And we also got a lot of DWI arrests. We also got a lot of criminal interdiction. We recovered 2 stolen vehicles and arrested 20 fugitives. So your crime crash component is there. Next. 1 out of 83 people in the metropolitan area were ticketed for distracted driving. So you can see how effective that enforcement can be and how we can really spread the message that this is something we're going to pay attention to and people are going to change if they want to get out of a ticket. Out of those people that were ticketed, 1 out of 2 were cited for dangerous driving, 1 out of 6 had license problems, and 1 out of 9 had seatbelt issues. So these aren't your, although everybody's doing it, the most egregious people that are doing it, the people that are so obvious that obviously we can latch onto them very quickly, it's very easy to see, and they're the ones that are committing these other, they are the ones that are the risky drivers. Next slide. Now, before I get to the close, I just want to tell you what happened. What did the social researchers find out? After we did these waves, talking on the cell phone dipped by 38%. Texting dropped by 42%. So we had a big impact. I think these, although they're still doing the research, I think the same thing that went on with Click It or Ticket, the same thing that went on with DWI, this ratcheting effect where we enforce the law, compliance goes up, then it goes back down, but not quite down to the lowest point that it was. And then we do it again, it goes back up and not quite back down, but keeps staying higher and higher. It's going to take time. Culture cannot change overnight. And I kind of want to tell you how I view what the public thinks, and I want to finish with this story. And it involved a megabus crash. It happened in Syracuse. It was 2010, September 11th, and it was about 2:30 in the morning. This megabus was going from Philadelphia to Toronto and was stopping in Syracuse, and the driver got lost. And he's negotiating this parkway. And while he's on this parkway, because he's lost, he starts using his Garmin and not paying attention. Now this parkway has this bridge that you can see in this picture, and it's only 10 feet 9 tall, and the bus was 13 foot 9 tall. As he's driving, there are no less than 13 signs before you get to this bridge, at least 2 of which have flashing lights telling him. And then you can see the bridge is outlined in fluorescent orange. So he smashes into the bridge, he kills 4 people, injures 27. He ends up getting arrested, admits that, hey, I was playing with my Garmin, I wasn't paying attention, and they arrest him for manslaughter, and it goes to trial. He elects very wisely not to have a jury trial, and he has a judge trial, bench trial. The judge finds him not guilty on all counts and says that we should tear down the bridge. It wasn't the driver's fault. I don't care how many changes you make in the infrastructure, and I believe it was Dr. Paul that talked about the driver being the weakest link. If we don't do something about the driver, I don't care what you change, they're still going to run off the road and still kill people. So to me, that's one of the focuses among many that we need to focus on. Thank you.